A win for both Seoul and Tokyo. President Yoon Suk-yeol rolls up his sleeves to persuade the public the pursuit of softer bilateral ties will boost economic and security cooperation. Chinese President Xi Jinping calls for peace talks over Ukraine in a joint statement with Russian leader Vladimir Putin, who says Ukraine and the West are not ready for it. The two dear friends also signal unity against the U.S. The U.S. CHIPS Act incentives will limit expansion of semiconductor manufacturing capacity in countries of concern by 5%. Not the worst-case scenario for South Korean firms for now. A win for both Seoul and Tokyo. President Yoon Suk-yeol has rolled up his sleeves to persuade the public that pursuit of softer bilateral ties will boost economic and security cooperation. Our top office correspondent Oh Soo-young leads our coverage this morning.
South Korea and Japan's bilateral ties are not a zero-sum game, but a forward-looking partnership rooted in the shared values of liberal democracy, rule of law and the market economy. That's according to President Yoon Suk-yeol on Tuesday, speaking at the first cabinet meeting held after his summit with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida last week. With Yoon's office having welcomed Kishida's invite to the G7 meeting in May, the South Korean president called for deeper reconciliation to forge new win-win relations, remembering history but not being shackled by the past.
날로 치열해지는 미중 전략 경쟁, 글로벌 공급망 위기, 북핵 위협의 고도화 등 우리를 둘러싼 복합 위기 속에서 한일 협력의 필요성은 더욱 커졌기 때문입니다.
Such issues, along with financial vulnerabilities, inflation and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, are among the top agendas for the upcoming G7 summit in Hiroshima. Amid various global challenges, Washington has been pushing Seoul and Tokyo to mend fences after their bilateral ties fell to a critical low in 2019, over Japan's wartime use of forced labor and sexual enslavement of women in Korea before and during World War II. The Yoon administration offered an olive branch earlier this month, with a plan to compensate Korean forced labor victims without requiring Japanese firms to make reparations or Tokyo to issue fresh apologies. With growing mood for reconciliation, Yoon and Kishida last week agreed to develop future-oriented relations with economic security dialogues and greater private sector exchanges. However, as Kishida faces 5 parliamentary by-elections next month, bolder moves by Tokyo to boost bilateral ties, especially over historically sensitive issues, may come after the G7 summit on his potential trip to Seoul.
And hopefully, when he's in South Korea, Prime Minister Kishida might feel he's more able to offer something more conciliatory, maybe pressuring the companies Mitsubishi Nippon Steel to make some sort of contribution to the compensation fund that's being set up, which is currently voluntary.
The leaders of South Korea, the US and Japan are likely to hold a summit on the sidelines of the G7 meeting, focusing on ways to increase trilateral cooperation on both security and economy. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Now, over in the Kremlin, Chinese President Xi Jinping calls for peace talks over Ukraine in a joint statement with Russian leader Vladimir Putin, who says Ukraine and the West are not ready for it. And the two dear friends are also signaling unity against the U.S. Our Lee Seung-ja has more.
After holding informal talks for over 4 hours on Monday, Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin held talks again on Tuesday, this time with their full delegations. And after their meeting on Tuesday, the two leaders signed and released a joint statement at the Kremlin in Moscow, where they called on the need to settle the Ukraine crisis through peace talks. Titled The Joint Statement of the People's Republic of China and the Russian Federation on Deepening the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership of Coordination for the New Era, both Xi and Putin stressed that the purposes and principles of the UN Charter must be observed and international law must be followed regarding the Ukraine conflict. Putin praised the Chinese leader's push to bring peace between Ukraine and Russia. However, he accused Kyiv and its Western allies of rejecting it. Xi, meanwhile, barely mentioned the ongoing war in Ukraine. instead apparently trying to remain firm on China's neutral stance. However, some American pundits say China's neutral stance needs to be questioned as Xi's visit to Russia highlights his determination to push back against the U.S. and its Western allies. Meanwhile, President Xi invited President Putin to visit China this year in what some believe is a symbolic show of support after the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Putin. Xi extended the invitation during Tuesday's meeting, inviting Putin to the third Belt and Road Forum for International Cooperation, along with Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin. Putin attended the Belt and Road Forum on two previous occasions in 2017 and 2019. Meanwhile, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg on Tuesday warned China against providing arms support to Russia. He said that the joint statement issued by the two leaders showed that China and Russia are coming closer, and that any weapon support from China would mean its support for an illegal war.
So first, we haven't seen any proof that China is delivering lethal weapons to Russia. But we have seen some signs that this has been a request from Russia, and that this is an issue that is considered in Beijing.
He added that if China is serious about bringing peace, it also needs to understand Ukraine's stance and communicate directly with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Washington has once again called on all UN member nations to make sure Pyongyang is held accountable for its series of military provocations in recent days. Speaking at a daily press briefing on Tuesday, the U.S. State Department's principal deputy spokesperson Vedant Patel said the North's latest provocation on Monday was especially concerning as the regime simulated the use of a tactical nuclear weapon. Patel stressed the need for international action to hold Pyongyang accountable, especially as China and Russia have used their veto power to block UN Security Council action. His comment comes just a day after the UNSC failed to produce any outcome in a meeting held to discuss measures against Pyongyang's continued provocations. And with Chinese President Xi Jinping visiting Russia, another strategic foreign visit took place on the other side of the Ukraine conflict. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida made a surprise visit to Kyiv on Tuesday for talks with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. The PM pledged to deliver $470 million worth of new aid for the energy sector and some $30 million through NATO funds for non-lethal equipment. Also, with Japan set to host the G7 summit in May, the PM invited Zelensky, to which the Ukrainian leader replied he would take part virtually. The visit by Kishida, the last G7 leader to visit Ukraine, comes amid growing domestic pressure to make the trip. Now he becomes Japan's first post-war leader to enter a war zone since World War II. The U.S. CHIPS Act incentives will limit expansion of semiconductor manufacturing capacity in countries of concern by 5%. Now, South Korean firms with production lines in China breathe a sigh of relief as the Act's details are not as strict as some had expected. Our Kim Do-yeon reports.
Semiconductor producers that receive U.S. subsidies will not be able to expand production of advanced chips in countries of concern by more than 5% over the next 10 years. This applies to South Korean companies such as Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix, who have production lines in China. Other countries of concern include Iran, Russia, and North Korea. On Tuesday local time, the U.S. Commerce Department released a notice of proposed rulemaking, and through a statement, U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo said, "The innovation and technology funded in the CHIPS Act is how we plan to expand the technological and national security advantages of America and our allies. These guardrails will help ensure we stay ahead of adversaries for decades to come." The Commerce Department says the limits on expansion is, quote, meant to allow for funding recipients that have existing facilities in a foreign country of concern to continue to operate and maintain their competitiveness by allowing for technological upgrades as long as the cap is met. The rule also limits recipients of incentive funds from engaging in joint research or technology licensing efforts with a foreign entity of concern and prohibits recipients of CHIPS incentives from using the funds in other countries. The proposed regulations allow the U.S. government to claw back the entire funding awarded to any recipient that breaks the Act's rules. South Korean companies had been anxiously waiting on the details of the restrictions as Samsung and SK both announced investment into the U.S. aiming for this subsidy, which could offer each company up to $53 billion through subsidies and tax cuts. However, the announcement was not as strict as expected, and Samsung and SK will be able to receive the subsidy while continuing production in China. With the new announcement, local reports quoted company officials from Samsung saying the company has avoided the worst. Currently, Samsung produces some 40% of its NAND flash chips, and SK hynix manufacturing about half of its global DRAM chips in China. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
On Monday, South Korea joined many countries around the world to allow the people to have the option of not wearing a mask when taking public transportation. Now, how has the response been, and what measures remain in terms of COVID-19 related rules? For more, we're joined by Dr. David Kwok from Soonchunhyang University. Welcome back to the program.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Good morning. The country confirmed just over 12,000 new COVID-19 cases on the first day, which is Monday, without mandatory mask wearing on public transportation. Now, that figure would obviously not yet reflect the eased mask rule, but how do you expect the infection trend to move going forward?
Well, what I see just recently is that, as you mentioned, the lift of the mandates for the mask does not necessarily show up in its effects right away. But what I've seen in the past 2 months or so, with also gradual lifting of the masking, I've seen that people kept on their mask most of the time, despite walking on the streets, or whether that be, inside a hospital or inside restaurants. When people were just generally taking on their daily activities, they decided to keep their mask on. So I don't think the effects of lifting the mandates have shown to the society yet. But what I see just recently was that I saw a gradual increase in number of people who started to take off their masks, especially on the streets, in the places where they feel safer to do so. And with the lift of the mandates for, keeping the mask on in the public transportation, even though not suddenly, probably more in the sense of gradual, in fashion of gradual, I think people will be starting to take off their mask. In regards to the effects of it, however, also because of its gradualness, I think there will be a gradual increase in the number of daily confirmations also. But I don't think it'll affect in a way that it'll suddenly increase to the number that we did not foresee before. So I anticipate that we'll begin to see more of a fluctuation in a very gradual fashion of increase and decrease in the numbers of confirmation cases.
Certainly. I'll be honest, it took me one full day to not wear my mask.
Well, it's hard for us because it's become a habit for us.
Right, very. And looking back, we've had multiple rounds of COVID-19 infection waves. And the question is, are we done with spikes in infection numbers? I mean, if not, how many more are yet to come? What do you think?
Well, referring back to the sort of gradualness of these measures that are happening, I don't think there will be a sudden spike in the number to come in the future. People, because they have been exposed to the massive numbers before, and they have been quite thoroughly vaccinated, the amount of people who will start to lose their immunity against COVID-19 would sort of differ for different age groups, different situations, different backgrounds of medical entities. communities. So I think, as I said before, now in the future, I think it'll be more likely that we'll start to see gradual fluctuations rather than sudden spikes and sudden drops in the numbers. So if you ask me a question to foresee how many more spikes we would see in the future, I don't think we'll see any spikes, but it's more likely that we'll see gradual uphill and downhills of the numbers.
Right, multiple ups and downs in the number of infections to come rather than spikes in the infection numbers. All right.
Probably.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Kwak, for your insights again this morning.
Thanks for having me.
On the back of K-culture enjoying much love globally, the Culture Ministry has published a book introducing traditional Korean liquor, including Gamhongno. Our Shin Se-byuk takes us on a journey to discover this unique beverage.
Sweet, red dough. That's what this Korean traditional liquor Kamungno literally means. This liquor, with its deep, gentle aroma, was considered one of the 3 best liquors of the Joseon dynasty. Amid increased global popularity of Korean culture, the Culture Ministry has published a book that introduces various traditional alcoholic beverages, and Kamungno was one of them. Although it may not be as popular as other drinks such as makgeolli, Kamungno has long been considered a medicinal liquor that warms the body. Today, Kamungno is brewed in Paju, Gyeonggi-do Province by Korea's Grandmaster No. 43 Lee Ki-suk. Lee is the only person in Korea who can make the liquor using the traditional recipe that's been passed down through generations of her family. Making Kamungno is all about waiting and patience. First, she mixes rice, millet, and the Korean fermentation starter duruk and lets the mixture sit and ripen for 15 days. Even the slightest change in temperature at this step can make a huge difference in taste later on. For the next 4 months, she distills it twice to get this crystal clear, 40% strength fine soju. However, it is only halfway there. She then adds 7 medicinal herbs, including ginger and cinnamon, before letting it sit for 3 more months. After that, she removes the solids from the liquid and lets the drink rest for 1 more year. And here marks the end of the 1.5-year journey of this red-colored dough that satisfies the senses of sight, smell, and taste. Lee says her goal is to continue to pass down the family legacy, keeping Korea's traditional drinks culture alive for future generations.
Kamungno began as a part of my father's and my grandmother's everyday life. Now it has become a part of Korean culture over time. I want to pass down not only the recipe, but also the spirit to our future generations.
She also says with Korean traditional alcoholic drinks becoming a candidate representing South Korea as its next culture ambassador, Kamungno could warm people's hearts.
Gamhongno is a liquor of warmth. I hope that it can serve as a symbol of Korean warmth and hospitality. In that way, I believe this could potentially contribute to the spread of Korean culture.
Shin Se-byuk, Arirang News.
For a look at the news from around the world, we now turn to our Matthew Ashley joining us here in the studio. Good morning, Matthew.
Good morning, Dami.
Let's start in Haiti this morning. The UN has reported on the devastating impact of gang violence in the country.
Well, that's right. According to a UN report on Tuesday, at least 530 people have died this year alone in Haiti as a result of increasing gang-related violence. Now, this is on top of 277 recorded kidnappings and 300 people left injured in attacks which have mostly taken place in the capital, Port-au-Prince. Now, the UN says the majority of casualties were killed or injured in sniper-like, seemingly indiscriminate shootings. In a bid to mitigate the situation, the UN has called for foreign intervention in the form of a specialized support force. And with U.S. President Joe Biden set to address the issue while meeting the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in Ottawa on Thursday, the UN will be hoping that Biden can convince Trudeau to send a security intervention team to stabilize the Caribbean country. Turning over to Uganda now, where Parliament passed a new law on Tuesday that brings back the death penalty and life sentences for homosexuality. Called the Anti-Homosexuality Bill, the law would give the death penalty for so-called aggravated homosexuality and life in prison if caught having gay sex. It marks an even stricter crackdown on the LGBTQ community in a country that has already banned homosexuality. The new law also introduces a 10-year prison sentence for merely identifying as LGBTQ or engaging in same-sex related activities. Such activities include promoting and abetting homosexuality. Supporters of the law say it's necessary to preserve traditional values, but human rights activists say that it violates multiple fundamental rights. Meanwhile, a major review into London's Metropolitan Police has accused it of being institutionally racist, sexist and homophobic. This is according to a 363-page report released on Tuesday, which followed a year-long review. The report alleges that the Met failed to protect both members of the public and female staff. It included stories of sexual assaults, many of which were covered up, and instances where evidence from rape cases were not properly stored. The report comes as public trust in Britain's biggest force has collapsed in the wake of a number of scandals, including a case where a police officer raped and murdered a woman. The report also included instances of racism and bullying among Met police officers.
Good morning. If you liked yesterday's warmth, you will like today's late May-like temperatures even more. Afternoon highs will be 12 degrees higher than seasonal norms today, even warmer than Daegu in Seoul this afternoon, rising to 24 degrees. And it's very likely many central parts of the country will have record-breaking warmth this afternoon. But sadly, the ultrafine dust level will stay high in the capital region in Chungcheong-Namdo province again. So please have a face mask that can filter out dust. Mostly sunny skies will turn cloudy with rain in the forecast on Jeju this morning, gradually spreading to southern provinces late this afternoon before expanding to the capital region tonight. And this round of rain is forecast to continue into tomorrow afternoon, which will help to ease the dryness in the air. Morning temperatures are 1 to 5 degrees higher than the same time yesterday, and southern provinces will have highs that are a couple of degrees lower with rain in the forecast. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That wraps up today's New Day at Arirang. Do stay with us for more updates throughout the day. Thanks for watching.